And by the way, there are restrooms in the hall here if anybody needs one. And we are live, so we'll go ahead and turn it off.
All right, we ready to rock and roll?
We're ready to rock and roll.
All right, well, good evening, folks. Thanks for coming out tonight. Let's start this evening off with a prayer. Oh, God, be good to us, for thy sea is so great and our boat is so small. Now, you probably recognize this. This is the Breton Fisherman's Prayer. It's an ancient prayer. This plaque was on President Kennedy's desk, the Resolute desk, on the Oval Office. Now, nowhere are these words more true than our Great Lakes. Vast, beautiful, but deadly. The first known shipwreck in the Great Lakes is LaSalle's Griffin, which sailed away in northern Lake Michigan in 1679. Now, one of the last shipwrecks, and probably the most famous and the biggest, is the Edmund Fitzgerald, which went to the bottom of Lake Superior on November 10th, 1975. In the nearly 3 centuries between these two historic shipwrecks, historians estimate between 6,000 and 12,000 more shipwrecks occurred, costing over 30,000 lives. Now, these are devastating numbers, almost beyond comprehension. Those of us who plied the Great Lakes know they are more than just mere lakes. They are inland seas, beautiful, but fraught with danger. My name is Ross Richardson. I am your guide for tonight's adventure. I am an author and a shipwreck hunter. I run a website called MichiganMysteries.com. Now, MichiganMysteries.com is dedicated to stories of missing persons, missing aircraft, and missing ships in the Michigan region. I have a couple books out, The Search for the Westmoreland and Still Missing, and we'll talk about those. Now, I live in LA. Probably not the LA you're thinking of when I say it like that. Lake Ann. I can't see the audience. Has anybody here been to Lake Ann? Okay, we got a couple folks here. Okay, not bad, not bad. In the Detroit area sometimes, I'll say, anybody been there? Anybody heard of it? Nobody, right? They're like, where the heck is that? Is that even in Michigan? Yes, it is in Michigan. I live in the northeast corner of Benzie County right here. So this little bit of white sand right there is Sleeping Bear Dune, which is about 15 or 20 minutes from my home. Now, these are two islands here. This is North Manitou and South Manitou Island, and this is the Manitou Passage, which we're going to be talking a lot about tonight. Now, up here is the Beaver Island Archipelago. Back in the 1800s, a lot of shipping came through Lake Huron here, through the Straits of Mackinac, and into Lake Michigan, over to Milwaukee and Chicago mostly. Now, the captains had 2 choices to make. They could go out and around the Beaver Island Archipelago, which would add 50 miles to their trip, or they could take this shortcut here through the Manitou Passage, saving them 50 miles. And of course, for the ship owners and captains of the day, time is money, money is time. Many took the shortcut, but you're already seeing a problem. Narrow pinch point, unpredictable weather, craggy shoreline. So that caused many a shipwreck in that area. We're going to talk about some of those shipwrecks tonight. Something you might not know, I am a volunteer librarian at the Elmira Township Library in beautiful downtown Lake Ann. Now, our library is probably half the size of this room, very small. And in the winters, very quiet. So a lot of this information you'll see, I did researching while I was at the library, going through old records and things like that. I'm also on the board of directors of the Maritime Heritage Alliance in Traverse City. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving, interpreting, and sharing the maritime history of our Great Lakes. And we do this in a number of ways. We operate the tall ship Madeline. So if you're ever up in Traverse City and look on West Bay and see those beautiful schooners going around, that's usually us. We are all volunteer organization, totally volunteer crew here. This was made by people in Traverse City. Matter of fact, we have a full wood shop that makes other boats and repairs wood boats. The Madeline is a replica of an 1850s Great Lakes schooner. There's our wood shop right there. Again, you don't have to know anything about woodworking or sailing. Come and volunteer. We'll teach you. And if you get really good, you can even check out some of our small sailing vessels and take them for a sail. So again, the Maritime Heritage Alliance, if you find yourself vacationing in the Grand Traverse region, please stop by and visit our campus. Now, you probably figured out my true passion is Great Lakes shipwrecks. This is a photograph taken by a friend of mine, Cal Cothrati. Now, we're going to talk a lot about Cal. He's an excellent underwater photographer and artist. And those are two things I'm not very good at, so I rely on him heavily to interpret a lot of things we do. This is a shipwreck called the St. Albans. It's in about 150 feet of water over on the Milwaukee side of Lake Michigan. Now, what's unusual is we can see almost 100 feet underwater and 150 feet deep in Lake Michigan. Now, what is causing that are these things encrusting the ship. Those are quagga mussels. Now, we're probably used to hearing about zebra mussels. Quagga mussels now represent 99.9% of the mussel species in Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, and Lake Erie. The zebras are basically gone. The quaggas are a slightly larger, slightly more resilient cousin of the zebra mussel. They came over the same way. They're an invasive species. They came over to hold of a freighter from the Black Sea. Now, they're not in Lake Superior. For some reason, they don't like the water. It's the alkalinity. Something's a little bit off in that Lake Superior water. So it used to be Lake Superior had the clearest water. Not anymore. Lake Michigan, we can have 100 to 150 foot visibility. This is over 100 foot visibility in this picture by Cal. Now, this is the Rouse Simmons. You probably know it better as the Christmas tree ship. It has Christmas trees still in the hold. But what's remarkable about this image is how far back we can see. This is a 122 foot ship, and we're well off the bow. This is over 100 foot visibility and 160 feet of water and ambient light. Now for the scary part. You see all this dark here? These light patches? These light patches are sand. This is a blanket of quagga mussels, which now covers most of the bottom of Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. Oh, the latest in shipwreck news. So there's been a lot of shipwreck discoveries lately, and let's talk about some of them. All right, 1869 shipwreck identified. We haven't even announced this to the public yet, so you're some of the first people to lay eyes on this. There was a shipwreck discovered off High Island, which we'll look at on the map, a very remote part of northern Lake Michigan. Now, most shipwrecks these days are found by side scan sonar. This one's a little bit different. This was discovered by a Coast Guard helicopter pilot on patrol. This would have never been found had not he looked out and down around High Island and seen a dark shape in the water and said, hey, that looks like a shipwreck. So he was telling his rescue swimmer about it, and his rescue swimmer says, hey, you ought to talk to my neighbor, who was me, who's the guy lived right next door to me, right? So it took us over a year to get back to see this because it's in such a remote spot. Now, up here is Beaver Island. How many people have ever been to Beaver Island? Quite a few. Good. I love Beaver Island. It's the opposite of Mackinac Island. They don't like tourists. The restaurants suck. But great, wonderful people, but it's not quite the same experience. So the island we're going to talk about is High Island. Now, we all heard about the Mormons on Beaver Island?
Yes.
Fantastic stuff. Now, there was another religious sect on High Island, the House of David, out of Benton Harbor. They had a compound up there. So here is St. James right here. This is where I docked my boat for about a week to get over to this side of High Island. Now, here's a close-up of High Island. Here's where the House of David had their compound back in the day. The wreck we found is right there. And let's take a look at it. So the Coast Guard pilot said he looked down and took coordinates of the wreck. It was mostly, I don't like looking at myself. See, I think I look like Brad Pitt. My wife says I look like his brother Stu. Now, this is my buddy Mark Ingelsma. If you are ever in Beaver Island and rent a kayak or a bike, you probably rented it from him. He's Happy Paddle. He has the kayak rental place right on the beach. So we're close to the shore. We're only 600 feet, 200 yards offshore. maybe in 7 feet of water, going into 10 feet of water. So very close. So I'll hand off my camera here. So interesting rocky bottom. I've never been to High Island before this, but it was an absolute perfect day, which are rare to find up there, especially last summer. Okay, very rocky bottom, a lot of cobblestone. Does anybody know the difference between cobblestone and fieldstone? Not all fieldstone is cobblestone, but all cobblestone is fieldstone. Never mind. So here we go, some wreckage. Okay. Now, shallow water wrecks take a pounding from the surf, from ice, things like that. They're usually flattened out. So I'm seeing ribs here. This is interior planking of what appears to be a very old sailing vessel. So Mark came up and he said, hey, I found a strange square object. What is this? And we'll see it right there. So I knew what it was. That's called a mast step. That's what they used to put the big mast steps in. We found 2 of them, therefore I know it was a 2-sticker, 2-masted sailing vessel, which fits perfectly with a ship that wrecked there in 1869. Very obscure. It's called the Live Yankee. So we went over the wreck site, everything matched up, the measurements. So we are looking at what's left of the wreck of the Live Yankee. Now this covers and uncovers with sand. So sometimes, you know, it was just a miracle this was ever found. So we got interior planking here, big oak timbers. But again, everything's busted up. We think there's more around there. We're going to have to go back and explore the area. Now, the Live Yankee wrecked in November 5th, 1869. It got lost in a snowstorm and went ashore. It was carrying a cargo of wheat. So they got beat up by the waves. The captain's niece was 15 years old. She stayed in the cabin and stood on a desk and got wet up to her knees. The porter, or steward, got hypothermia. They all ended up making it into the boat and making it ashore, where the Indians, Native Americans, rescued them and brought them into their wigwam and warmed them up. The steward ended up passing from hypothermia, but they were able to recover the captain's niece, who was about 15 years old at the time. And huge. This is probably 18 inches wide, 3-4 inches thick. There I am. Now, I don't dive much anymore, but I do love to snorkel. So this was a shallow enough wreck we could do a little low-tech look at it. And down we go. This is in about 10 feet of water. So the planking, just a simple GoPro camera. There's that mast step, an idea of the scale of the mast. These masts were over 100 feet high, very, very thick. They had that square cutout so they wouldn't twist in there. So again, good adventure to High Island. That is what the ship looks like. There's no actual pictures of the Live Yankee. Many of the wrecks or many of the ships from the 1800s, there are no photographs, but it would be very similar to this. 2-masted schooner the same size. This was built in the same shipyard in Milan, Ohio. Now, Tom Farquest found the Montego, which burned and sank in 1909 in Mud Bay off the St. Mary's River. Now, Tom founded the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum up in Whitefish Point. Great guy, longtime shipwreck hunter. Here are some sonar images. Now, he does not have video of this because Mud Bay describes the bay it's in. It's very muddy water. It's not clear like we were seeing in Lake Michigan. It says maybe a couple foot visibility. He's hoping to get back this winter and cut a hole in the ice and drop a camera down and hopefully see it better. But from the side scan image, we can see a lot of detail. There's a lot of ships still left here for being a burn job. Again, that's what we call a shipwreck that burns to the waterline and sinks. A lot of elevation here, so hopefully Tom will be able to get back and explore the site a little more. Speaking of the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum at Whitefish Point, the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society announced the discovery of the 290-foot whaleback vessel Barge 129. So she is a whaleback vessel made by Alexander McDougall in the 1890s. Again, these were half submarine, half freighter. So this was almost 300 feet long. And what happened is she got in a storm. She was being towed by the Mauna Loa on October 13, 1902, and the tow line broke. So the Mauna Loa came to rehook up, and the anchor of the Mauna Loa dug into the side of barge 129 and ripped a hole in it, and she started to sink. So the crew got in this lifeboat, were able to make it over to the ship, but the vessel sank out from under them. Now here are sonar images. It's in 650 feet of water, one of the deepest shipwrecks ever found in the Great Lakes, 100 feet deeper than the Edmund Fitzgerald. And we can see it's busted up pretty good. And it was carrying iron ore. Ships that carry iron ore don't fare as well when they hit the bottom. Look at that. They hit and bent like a pretzel right there. So again, a lot of damage. We're looking forward to seeing some video footage from our friends at the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society. Ken Merriman made an excellent discovery a couple of years ago in Lake Michigan. It was the largest still missing vessel in Lake Michigan, the steamer Pierre Marquette 18, which sank in 1910, traveling from Ludington, Michigan to Milwaukee. She sprang a leak mid-lake, started to go down, and her fleet mate, Pierre Marquette 17, came alongside and was able to save about half the crew and passengers. Half the crew and passengers died, however, including the entire bridge crew. So they never did really figure out why she sank. Now, she sank by the stern. We can see the bow sticking up, and this is a very unusual wreck site. This is the side scan sonar image. The vessel sank and dug into the bottom, stern first. This is the bow. It's over 100 feet off the bottom. So it sticks out of the bottom like a finger. So if divers could get down that far, divers are really limited. 300-400 feet is the deepest the best divers can go right now. Divers could actually swim underneath this wreck. Let's take a look at some video. This is in 450 feet of water. First thing we notice, quagga mussels, completely infested. They like wood, but they love steel. And this wreck at 450 feet, we were shocked that it was this infested. Now coming over the bow here, look at this damage. It looks like it's crushed like an empty beer can. What we think happened is it was so heavy that the air pocket in the bow didn't have time to disperse. So when it got down about 100 or 200 feet, it just crushed from the water pressure. That's thick plate steel. And just mangled it. Here's where the cabins would start. They are towards the rear. The pilot house blew off and landed towards the stern. Ken made it back out this summer, and they have better video coming out soon and better imagery of the wreck site, and I can't wait to see it. I have a little video I want to play of a discovery I made a few years back in the Manitou Passage of the W.C. Kimball, a small schooner that sailed away from Northport, Michigan and disappeared. Let's take a look.
To go dive. It's believed there may be hundreds of undiscovered shipwrecks still off of our shores in Lake Michigan. And tonight, we can take one ship off the list of missing. Fox 6's Ben Handelman with a discovery that may be one of the most significant finds ever discovered in any Great Lake.
Trying to just find something.
For anyone who has cast a line in the Lake Michigan, the mystery of what lies below
I do hope we get one.
draws us close to the shore.
This particular story starts out with a family trip.
Ross Richardson
My cousins were visiting from Georgia, and they wanted to go to South Manitou Island.
lives on the other side of the lake. He spent nearly all of the summer of 2018 looking not for fish,
And they were all excited. They were like, oh, we could see some shipwreck hunting, not realizing how really boring it is, 10 hours looking at a computer screen. But I said, on the way out to the island, we'll put the fish in the water and we'll kind of look around.
wouldn't you know it?
After about 5 minutes, we ran over a small target. It wasn't big, but I knew it was something worth looking at.
A flip on the screen worth returning to.
A week later, I stopped by the site again on the way out to the islands with different family members. And I ran the sonar and got a little more imagery, and something significant happened. Something was ringing on the sonar 90 feet off the bottom.
Ross called and
Meanwhile, in Milwaukee,
said that he had an interesting target.
Steve Weimer
I saw the radar images.
and Cal Kothrati were sent to find
I thought, boy, it sure looks like a shipwreck. Sure looks like a schooner.
the veteran shipwreck hunters have been fooled before.
I don't know how many times we've gone, oh, there's a wreck, and you go down and it's a rock or, some other shape that just looks like a shipwreck.
The only way to be sure,
Only a few divers in the entire Great Lakes could make this dive.
find a man who could dive nearly 300 feet deep into the lake.
It's a dive, yeah, I'll go dive.
Weimer making the roughly 7-hour drive to determine what was below.
I stopped at right around 210, 215 feet-ish, and I looked around, but I didn't see anything. I kept going, and probably at about 240, 250 feet, I could see the ship. And I'm right over the bow.
With his camera rolling,
I was like, okay, yeah, definitely ship.
Weimer could not believe his eyes.
I just kind of swam along the port side towards the stern, and from there I could see the cabin. So once I saw the cabin, that was where I was like, whoa.
Standing 90 feet upright, the ship's masts are perfectly intact from the wheel to the cabin planks. Even the hatches are all in place.
When I saw the lifeboat, because it's right off the stern of the ship, I was speechless. This is amazing. I can't believe it.
From aboard their boat,
This is the most intact shipwreck I've ever seen. It's just beautiful.
the men sent images of their find back to Milwaukee.
Every picture I looked at that was sent to me in the text just kept showing me more and more intact. And I'm like, oh my goodness.
An incredible find with even bigger questions.
I'm a shipwreck nerd, so I study this. I mean, that's what I do. And I have a chance, I sit down, I go through old records. So I know about everything missing. And I knew there was nothing in the area that really matched this vessel. So I knew we had a real mystery.
There were hints, including a distinct shape in the front.
We had a vessel here that, probably had Wisconsin roots. A lot of clipper brows were made in Wisconsin, at Manitou, and Milwaukee. So, okay, that's kind of a clue there.
He poured over so many thousands of documents, came up with a short list.
And of course, I started at A, and it took me to W, and I found one. And I was like, oh, son of a gun. And they had a picture of it.
The mystery ship is a mystery no more.
What's the vessel?
The W.C. Kimball. It was built in 1888 in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. It was sold to parties a year later in Northport, Michigan. It was traveling from Manistee with a load of salt, had barrels of salt in the hold, and cedar shingles on the deck. And they were heading to Northport and Traverse City to deliver these.
The captain, first mate, a newly hired deckhand, and one passenger made 4 on board.
They were short-handed on the crew, but this journey would only be 50 miles, so I'm sure they were thinking, oh, we can make this a piece of cake.
While they had a name, the men wondered, why is a perfectly intact wooden schooner sitting on the bottom of Lake Michigan? What happened to her crew?
A shipwreck, it's wrecked, it's broken.
This thing settled on the bottom like a feather.
This is not broken, it's perfect.
That tells us that it was more than likely encased in ice.
The team now believes they know what happened.
We surmise that a early spring gale can build a lot of sea ice on a boat. And that is heavy, and it makes it unseaworthy. And once it gets submerged, now it's starting to sink.
They probably lost the captain first, the head of the ship, and then the first mate after that, and then the other 2 guys were very inexperienced, so one by one they were washed aboard, leaving in a ghost ship, the lifeboat on the stern. That was, again, pretty haunting, because that's the first thing you're going to go to if your ship is sinking. I think it was frozen as a block of ice. I probably had 2-3 feet worth of ice on it, and it just settled oh so gently. Maybe the salt cargo helped keep it a little bit buoyant. We just don't know.
For more than a century, the whereabouts of the W.C. Kimball have been a mystery.
It's been found, so it's not just forgotten.
A discovery made nearly on accident.
Now, 130 years later, it's the absolute best preserved wreck we have.
We're also scanning the bottom for
A perfect catch
other wreckage,
for a group of shipwreck hunters
other clues,
who say the search for the next great find
possibly human remains.
is already underway.
If you like good mysteries, this is the ultimate way of sleuthing through and actually solving mysteries. There's a purpose to what we do also, and that's sharing the history.
Ben Handelman, Fox 6 News.
Absolutely remarkable. The men credit the marine collection at the Milwaukee Public Library and the Wisconsin Marine Historical Society for helping in their research, which was clearly thorough. Do you want to learn more about shipwrecks in our area? It is fascinating. Just head to the link section at fox6now.com. Wow.
This is some imagery created by Cal. It's a digital painting of the W.C. Kimball wreck site. It shows the yawl boat right at the stern. I mean, that was connected when it sank. There's no way that went down independently at 300 feet of water. Masts come up 90 feet off the bottom. This thing, you could bring it right up again and it would sail again. It's an amazing time capsule from a time long ago. Again, very detailed. Cal actually counted out every quagga mussel. There's over 400,000 of them on this vessel. And I'm just kidding. He didn't do that. It's really close. It's really accurate. Yeah, an amazing image. It really captures what the treasures that are at the bottom of our Great Lakes. This is down in my workshop in the basement. I'm making a model of the W.C. Kimball. That's one of the things I learned how to do at the Maritime Heritage Alliance, and I'm donating it to the Northport Area Museum. This is kind of a big story up there. Even 130 years later, when they lost 3 members of their community, it was pretty devastating. So this will be on display next summer in the Northport Area Museum if you're up in northern Michigan visiting. I have another brief video to play that tells a little bit of the story of the Westmoreland shipwreck I discovered in 2010 right near Sleeping Bear Dune. As a matter of fact, if you were on the lookout on Sleeping Bear Dune and you emptied the water, you'd be able to see the ship out there. It sank in 1854 and was much looked after because many people thought it had whiskey and gold for it. So a true Great Lakes treasure ship. Let's take a look.
On December 7, 1854, the 200-foot-long wooden passenger steamer Westmoreland foundered during a winter gale in northern Lake Michigan, taking 17 of her crew and passengers with her. 17 of her crew and passengers survived, however, and stories soon began circulating the Westmoreland carried $10,000 in gold coins in her safe and 280 barrels of whiskey in her hold. 2 decades after the Westmoreland foundered, her first mate, Paul Pelkey, returned to search for the ship and her treasures. In 1872 and 1874, newspaper articles claimed the Westmoreland was discovered and salvaged, her engine and boilers delivered to a dock in Chicago. In 1936, 25-year-old Max Knoll and 19-year-old Jack Brown teamed up with an old salt from Frankfort, Michigan by the name of Captain George Waters and launched a search expedition to find the treasure ship. Cap Waters, who actually met the Westmoreland's first mate, Paul Pelkey, during the 1870s, claimed to know the exact location of the Westmoreland. The trio was said to have found the wreck and then used prototype dive gear to dive and explore the wreck site, which they described as a broken up board pile. The following year, 1937, Jack Brown and Max Knoll founded the Desco Corporation. Desco, the diving equipment and salvage company in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, went on to be one of the biggest diving equipment manufacturers in the world. The 1950s brought a couple more expeditions to find the Westmoreland. In 1954, Captain Harold E. Van Nyman of Flint, Michigan, searched for and claimed to have located the treasure shipwreck. He said the wreck covered and uncovered with the sand, and also claimed to have recovered a barrel and had it sent out to have its contents analyzed. Sadly, the following year, 1955, Van Nyman was arrested on fraud charges brought by the investors of his Westmoreland expedition. In 1957, Jim and Nancy Sawtell arrived in Frankfort, Michigan, and spent more than a decade looking for the Westmoreland. The Sawtells are best known for creating shipwreck restaurant interiors and shipwreck furniture, which was sold in the Leland and Charlevoix areas. The 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 90s brought around a dozen treasure hunting expeditions to northern Michigan, but no claims of finding the ship or her treasures. On July 7, 2010, while side-scanning the waters near Sleeping Bear Dune, I ran over a large, ship-shaped target in nearly 200 feet of water. 3 days later, I journeyed back to the site to dive the mysterious underwater object. It was just me and my brother Bob on the boat. My plan was to dive down to the object, and if it was the Westmoreland, film the hogging arches, which would positively identify the target as the Westmoreland. We hooked the object, I suited up, and down the line I went. I looked down, and below me I saw the bow of an enormous ship. I only had a brief moment to look, then I went back to the ritual of clearing my ears, inflating my dry suit, and aiming my camera. I slowly made my way aft, surveying the wreck and pondering if I was the first one to see this in the last 150 years. The forward cabins and pilot house were missing, and I saw the mast broken off about 6 feet above the deck. It was the same diameter as your typical telephone pole. The arches came into view. They rose about 12 feet above the deck, the passenger railing perfectly intact. There was a brace connecting the arches, a round tube about 6 inches in diameter. I reached out a hand and touched it. As I passed by, it was covered in quagga mussels. The deck appeared to be collapsed between the arches. I continued towards the stern. I wanted to see if the engine and boiler were still there, or if she was salvaged in 1874, as a newspaper report said. In the distance, the lifeboat davits appeared, the cranes used to launch the lifeboats. And there was a smokestack base, the smokestack plenum with a boiler right below it, and the engine cylinder right behind that, covered with a piece of deck, and those davits that came about 14 feet off the deck. The ship wasn't salvaged. I decided to go to the very stern, and out of the gloom appeared the auxiliary helm, a perfectly intact 4-foot ship's wheel. A single word raced through my mind: virgin. This was the Westmoreland, and she was a virgin wreck. Over the next 2 years, the Westmoreland revealed herself to us, her legend, her history, and her wreck site, an underwater museum, an ice water time capsule. The Westmoreland has been lying on the bottom of Lake Michigan, unmolested, since 1854. The auxiliary helm, not a spoke or spindle out of place. It's almost a miracle considering the Westmoreland went nearly vertical when she sank. The passenger railing still intact around most of the ship. Quagga mussels cover much of the vessel now, hiding details, but giving us the incredible visibility we have in the Great Lakes today. The lifeboat davits. Eyewitnesses say one of the davits hooked the last lifeboat launch, flipping it over, throwing 15 of its passenger and crew into the icy water. They all drowned right here on the stern of the Westmoreland. Looking down, we see the propeller and the rudder. Just the bottom blades of the 4-bladed propeller touch the sand. The Westmoreland lies on a very hard bottom. Looking at the stern, we see the rudder with its unusual 2 attachment points. With nearly 100-foot visibility, the Westmoreland reveals herself further. From the bottom of Lake Michigan to the top of the hogging arch is a remarkable 30 feet. The white oak construction of the Westmoreland has proven resilient, considering she spent over 15 decades in the bottom of Lake Michigan. A gangway is wide open, her hatch being blown off during the sinking. And we see the passenger deck collapse down onto the cargo deck. Eyewitnesses said passengers and crew members were clinging to the arches as the Westmoreland went down when she sank in that December storm in 1854. Cal Coltrati, a Milwaukee artist, created this beautiful image of the Westmoreland wreck site, showing us an opportunity to penetrate the bow area. With the bulwarks missing, it's easy to enter the Westmoreland. Her portside anchor hanging down, woodstock aiming towards the bottom of Lake Michigan. A heavy coating of quagga mussels obscures the Westmoreland's oak timbers. The water temperature is 39 degrees as we enter a room that has been unseen by human eyes since over a decade before President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. The windlass comes into view, covered in quagga mussels, chains still wrapped around it. Signs of the violent sinking are everywhere. Collapsed deck, pieces of wood laying all about. And there's a large cargo container, probably containing a cargo meant for the garrison at Mackinac Island. Behind that container, a staircase, still intact, rising up to the passenger deck. As we move towards the stern, we see a small opening to the yet unexplored bilge level.
So I love that story. I love the early searchers of it. It's just good, fun stuff. And what I really like is with today's technology, I can bring you right down on the wreck. And you don't have to put on 150 pounds of dive gear and get 39-degree water, which is nice. But these are amazing treasures we have surrounding our entire lake, Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, Lake Superior. Imagine finding a building downtown sealed up since 1854 that nobody's seen. I mean, that just does not happen on dry land, yet it's not uncommon, even in Lake Michigan, just a few miles from shore. Let's talk a little bit about still missing. Look, I've heard of D.B. Cooper.
Oh, yeah.
That's a whole nother rabbit hole. We don't have time for that tonight, but believe me, I've got a great Michigan tie-in for that one. That's in the book. But we're going to talk about something else. So Still Missing is based on my website, michiganmysteries.com. And it's a story about a missing person, a missing grocery store manager from Grayling, Michigan, Robert Richard Lepsey, and this couple, John and Jean Block, who we're going to talk about shortly, a ship, the Andaste, a semi-whaleback, because you know I love shipwrecks, and of course the D.B. Cooper story. We're going to talk a little bit about a different airplane story. This is John and Jean Block. Now, they disappeared in their Cessna, pictured here, July 4th, 1977. Now, it was a beautiful July 4th, much like the July 4th we just had. It was pretty clear, it was humid, a little bit hazy. They took off from Macomb County Airport, just north of Detroit, flying to the Lost Creek Sky Ranch in Luzerne, Michigan. How many people have been to Luzerne? I can't really see you with a couple people. Okay, it's hard for me to see with these lights, but I think 3 of you raised your hands. Very remote area, and we'll take a look at that. So they took off at about 10 in the morning. Should have been about a 2-hour flight. They vanished, and they still haven't been found. Now, what's unusual about this is their route was almost entirely overland. It was entirely overland. John would have flown up 75 here and either turned north at a little town called West Branch or went up to Grayling and then headed east over here. Now, Lost Creek Sky Ranch is in Oscoda County, and it's a pretty remote area. So looking over, we don't think they're anywhere south of West Branch. And here's why. Here's a population density map. Look down here, very densely populated, all farmland, very flat. Any woods would be hunted. They would have been found at some point in time, but you get up here, it gets really dark, less than 1 person per square mile. That's the Huron National Forest. And that's a lot of cedar bogs, a lot of terrain, a lot of hilly area, heavy forest, a lot of swamp area in that, and just square mile after square mile of God's country up there. So about 5 or 6 years ago, we were contacted by a fisherman on the Osable River in Alcona County, and in that area, and he said, hey, I think I found part of a green and white aircraft, and I Googled it and found your name. Are you guys interested in this? I said, oh yeah. Well, John Block Jr. is a good friend of mine, and I called him immediately, and he took these pictures to the aviation school at NMC in Traverse City, and they were like, yeah, we think it's part of an aircraft. So the Alcona County Sheriff took his personal boat up the river. This was half mile from the nearest tube track. It was in the national forest, nothing. Brought it into town and identified it as the side of a pop-up camper. We were crestfallen. We were just like, oh, you know, it's finally, we found finally the clue we've been looking for. But that's good news, because at least somebody had the presence of mind to find something and think, okay, that could be something I need to contact somebody. So again, that was in this area. So a couple years ago, we were contacted by a gentleman who said, hey, I was looking on Google Earth and I saw something in a swamp just 7 miles south of the Lost Creek Sky Ranch landing site. I think it could be the aircraft. Well, we got together a group of us. There's the image right there. He says, hey, this could be the Block's plane. So that Thanksgiving weekend, we all loaded up and headed over to Luzerne. And there we are right there, a bunch of us out in the woods. And I mean, this is some remote stuff there. This is Josh Block, the grandson of the missing couple. And he put on his waders and basically crawled through that swamp, which I don't even know how he made it. Him and his buddy made it there and back. It took them just to go half a mile, you know, almost an hour. It's pretty amazing. And he came out of there and he fell down on his knees. He was so tired. He said, I need a beer. We didn't have any, but just the dedication to try to find his grandparents. Now, we didn't find anything there, but what do you guys think of finding a missing aircraft on Google Earth? Is it possible or not? Well, let's talk about another aircraft. This couple took off from, what's the island? Drummond Island. Drummond Island, heading down to the Ann Arbor area. They were teachers. They took off in 1997. They disappeared. It's thought they were lost in Lake Huron. In 2018, over 20 years later, a forestry worker was just a couple miles out of St. Ignace, right by Castle Rock, stumbled across their aircraft with them still sitting in it. Over 20 years later. Here are pictures of the crash site. So there is still a group of us out looking for John and Jean Block's Cessna to this day. We have a group of about 10 of us, including Michigan's underwater archaeologist is affiliated, a couple of commercial flight instructors, and a couple guys that hiked out into the woods. They hiked out into the woods. This aircraft is still there. It was too hard to recover. So we went on Google Earth after we got the coordinates and went back in time, and you know what? You could see this. You know, on Google Earth, there's a feature you can bring back the calendar, and certain times when the leaves were off the trees in the fall, you could see the aircraft sitting in the woods. That's not the only example of a Michigan aircraft. This gentleman took off from Escanaba in 1989. And in 2000, a couple of bear hunters found him in a cedar bog outside of Curtis, just a few miles outside of town, but that is really God's country up there. And again, he was sitting in the aircraft still. That aircraft is visible on Google Earth. So we have a team of us looking through Google Earth and looking for targets to go and explore on foot or by drone. And we've also created a PSA to share with DNR workers and forestry workers, hunters, to show what aircraft can look like in the woods. We don't think this is an intact aircraft. We think they went in hard, maybe in a swampy area. When I see like that, that doesn't look like an aircraft to me. That looks like a car engine and some aluminum siding, maybe an old tree stand. But maybe a hunter has come across what he thought was a pile of wreckage, and it wasn't recognizable as an aircraft, and we're trying to get these going. We did get an interesting tip from a lady whose family had property on the edge of a swamp, and she says she remembers being a young child and playing with parts of an aircraft in that swamp. So we're going to check that out. That's the type of leads we're hoping to generate to find John and Jean Block. So the search still goes on for this couple that disappeared in 1977. I'm really hoping we can find them and bring them home for their family. Search for John and Jean Block. If you're on YouTube, the Not Forgotten channel shows these guys hiking out into the woods. Pretty amazing stuff. And there's a Facebook page, The Search for John and Jean Block, still going on today. There they are. Hopefully we'll bring them home. All right, on to Seeking the Lord. Now, I named this part of the program Seeking the Lord because the name of the shipwreck is the Jarvis Lord, and I looked for this for over 8 years. And that's how long it took to find it. Now, I did other things during the 8 years too. It's not the only thing I did, but it took over 8 years. Now, the first time I heard of the Jarvis Lord was this news article right here, dated from 1885. It was in August. Loss of the steamer Jarvis Lord from St. Ignace to Chicago with a load of iron ore. Okay, just like the Edmund Fitzgerald. Let's see. Monday, well, off the Manitous, it sprang a leak, and the pumps were made useless. They put her about and headed for Glen Haven. About 1 o'clock, within 2 miles of that place, 2 miles of Glen Haven, she was abandoned and sank stern first in 40 fathoms of water. The crew all escaped and they landed in Glen Haven. This is going to be so easy to find, right? I just draw a line 2 miles outside of Glen Haven, match it up with 240 feet, which is whatever many fathoms, a piece of cake. Meanwhile, 8 years later, it's nowhere near what they say it is. Anyways, fake news, early fake news, I don't know. But I spent many years looking where it wasn't. That is a model of the Jarvis Lord that we built. That is a example of the vessel. She was an early bulk freighter. Now, bulk freighter munitions, these top loading hatches right here, engineering in the back, pilot house in the front. Let's see here. Okay, so the significance of the bulk freighter. So I'll give you a little primer about Great Lakes steamships. About late 1830s, they started developing the first propellers. They were pretty crude. 1840s, 1850s, most steamers were side wheel steamers. Now, these vessels were not good in storms and very hard to dock. So 1850s, 1860s, 1870s, they switched to screw technology or propeller. Now, this is a passenger steamer. These are most passenger steamers. This is set up with passenger cabins up here and gangways down here. And we can see the gangways. This is the Westmoreland, of course. Now, the gangways, they would load in cargo by hand. Everything had to come in by hand. Everything had to be in a barrel, a bushel, a crate. It was very laborious to move things out there. So in 1869, the first bulk freighter was created. Now, the bulk freighters like we think of to nowadays, freighters, top loading hatches in the middle, they would just dump in bulk freights like wheat, corn, coal, iron ore, things like that. It made it much more efficient to move these cargoes around because you didn't have to pay the manpower to put them into barrels and crates and things like that. So 1869 was the first one. The Jarvis Lord was built and launched in November of 1872 in Marine City, Michigan. So it's a Michigan boat. Now this vessel is the George King. It was built 2 years later at the same shipyard in Marine City, Michigan. And I love this photo because it shows these people and we can really see how deep it is. These holds were very deep for holding a lot of cargo. Now, one thing we didn't talk about the Westmoreland is the hogging arches right here, or bishop's trusses. These were basically a suspension bridge built to firm up these steamers. These steamers were made out of wood and they needed something to make the hull stronger. So they built basically a suspension bridge called a hogging arch there. Now they really needed to strengthen these up and they did it in an unusual way. I'll tell you that in just a second. So eventually this bulk freighter design morphed into the giant bulk freighters we know today. This is the Edmund Fitzgerald. This is roughly to scale. The Jarvis Lord was about 190 feet long. The Edmund Fitzgerald was 729 feet launched in the 1950s, just enormous. So to strengthen up ships like the Jarvis Lord, they had the main deck here with a cargo hatch. They built another deck halfway down. So they had two different decks. And notice where the boiler is sitting right here. It's not sitting way at the bottom, probably because if they got water in there, it would flood and put the fires out. But it's sat up here on the secondary deck in the hull. Now, we only have two images of the Jarvis Lord. That one we just saw there, and this right here is a shot of her being pulled out of port right there. So both from the stern, both give us an idea of what it looked like. This is an early search. This was back when I was thin and my hair wasn't. And we were looking in the early days, about 2011, before we found it. This is how she looked a couple of years ago. I had an image on my sonar. Now, my sonar is great for long range, but it doesn't paint a very good picture of what's down there now. So I saw this. I said, oh, we got a big shipwreck. Funky shapes, but I'm going to need divers to go down and take a look. So my good friend Steve Weiber came with his partner, Katrina Colby. We call her Kat. Both are very experienced technical divers and underwater videographers. So I sent them down to film the wreck so we could hopefully identify it and maybe solve why she sank. Let's take a look at the video. There she is. Jarvis Lord sank on a beautiful summer day, August 1885. Everybody lived. Every August day we were out there, though, it wasn't as beautiful. If you get seasick easy, you don't want to hang out with us because that's what it's like every day. So, ship's wheel, we found that right away off the starboard bow. One of the stories from the survivors was that the air pressure blew the pilot house off and covered the people in the lifeboats with slivers and wood chips, and that seems to be what happened. Okay, we're heading back towards the body of the wreck. That is Steve Weimer right there, diving a rebreather. He's taking the lead. Kat is filming. We're at the very bow off the starboard side. A lot of wreckage here. Yeah, not near as intact as a W.C. Kimball. Look at this crater. We know she sank by the stern. And when the bow came down, it created this huge crater that's still there 140 years later. Okay, coming down the side, we see some what appears to be iron ore laying off to the side. Quagga mussels lightly coating the bottom. Not unusual, and all over the ship. And for some reason, they like steel more than they like wood. They like wood, they love steel. So we can still see some wood here, but we see some heavy damage as we're coming up over the side. Something down here, perhaps a condenser or a wood stove of some kind, type of machinery. This wreck lies in about 220 feet of water. are. Boy, a lot of damage. Some of the wreck looks to be filleted open. That's what we call a shipwreck, where the sides kind of open up on it. Not uncommon with ships that carry iron ore and hit the bottom hard. Corn ships, ships with coal usually are much more intact. But a lot of damage here. So we see the deck. The deck is collapsed down a bit. So what we need to know is that the top deck, is that the prime of the main deck, or is that secondary deck down below?
Russ, can I ask you a question?
Yes,
You said he's using a rebreather.
yes.
How does that work?
That is like the astronauts use, and it has a scrubber in it. It has a diluent that scrubs out the carbon dioxide, and it cleans it out and makes sure, reuses the air and helium in that case, and just cleans out all that and keeps it good. So to use it in nuclear submarines also. So you're not seeing a lot of bubbles coming out.
Right.
Interesting here, this is the bed that the boiler sits on. So we know this is the secondary deck. Where is the primary deck? Up here. And also, where's the boiler? Now, they used to salvage ship boilers. There were big chunks of steel, big chunks of iron. But this was awfully deep for salvage divers, 220 feet. Usually they were 120, 130 feet was their max working. So we got a mystery to solve. Where's the boiler? This boiler was a 16-foot boiler about the size of a small house or a school bus. So it didn't just walk away.
Did you say it blew up? Yeah, it blew up.
We'll have to see. Maybe you're picking, we'll take bets. You're saying it blew up? Okay.
Well, I thought that's, you said the front part blew up.
No, the pilot house from the air pressure.
Pilot house blew up.
Now we're coming towards the stern here. Here is the giant single cylinder steam engine. That steam cylinder right here is about the size of a small car. So just one cylinder, made by DeSoto and Hutton in Detroit, Michigan, and brought up to Marine City in a barge and installed in the Jarvis Lord. This should be enclosed. This is the engine room, and we're seeing a lot of damage here. Now, here's something really cool, is I think this is the steam gauge covered in coagus right there. So still nice to have the steam gauge still there. Heading towards the stern, heavy damage right here. She's split, she's filleted open. We're switching to Steve's video right here. Little different view, lots of tools and artifacts and implements laying all over. Again, this would have been totally enclosed in the engine room, so we can expect to see those types of things. Again, split right down the keel. The rudder, that's probably 2 stories high, and it's buried in the sand. In the bottom, lightly covered in those dirty little quads. Little piece of white right there. Maybe that's a piece of china. Big piece of hull right there, curved hull. Obviously, when it hit the bottom very hard, it scooped, like spooned in the sand and everything back. Oh, look at that. Tips of the propeller blade. Okay, so she's pretty buried in the stern. We would expect that. Now, we're right off the stern right now. And that's how she looks today. A far cry from her in her heyday. So again, split right open. Again, spooned in a bunch of sand when she sank. Now there's Kat. I really dig her dry suit. She has a pink dry suit. How cool is that? And we're switching back to her video. Again, this engine room is in shambles, busted up. Now, reports were she was breaking apart as she went down. The giant steam engine connecting rod here going down to a counterweight and propeller shaft. Again, built by DeSoto and Hutton of Detroit. A lot of quagga mussels covering the details. Again, this is engine area, probably coal bunkers in there, all busted apart when she sank. Now there's that X. So Kat came up and said, I seen a big X somewhere, and we were joking. Well, later that night, we put this on the big screen and we were eating popcorn, and that appeared. It's like, okay, she did see an X. She couldn't remember where it was, but it was a cross brace of this. Oh, Steve is starting to signal he sees something. There's the boiler. Again, the size of a small house, 16 feet in diameter. So it's laying off to the side. Now, what we think happened is, being filled with iron ore, when the boiler went out, the captain knew he was done. He lost his bilge pumps. It was time to abandon ship. So they got in the lifeboats rushed by the pilot house. The ship sank out from underneath them quickly. The pilot house exploded. The boiler didn't have time to fill with water, became buoyant and ripped up through the deck. So it ripped that top deck off. So can you imagine being in the lifeboat, pilot house explodes, boiler comes up behind? Lucky it was nice weather. Probably the first thing they needed when they got to shore was a fresh change of underwear. But they all made it. The deck was found floating over by Point Betsy a few weeks later, so it floated around the Lakes Royale before it broke up and sank. And we're heading back towards the bow. Steve is leading the way. Now, if you notice, look at how he's kicking. We'll see if we can get back up and get a shot of his finning technique. That is called the frog kick. And that is how we're trained when you dive, technical diving, wreck penetration, wreck videoing, you learn the frog kick. And the reason is, if you think about the scissors kick a normal swimmer would use or diver, the vortices that come off the fins in the water go up and down. Well, that downward vortex of water would hit the deck and kick up silt. So it would make it hard to see. So with cave diving, this comes from cave diving. A lot of us Great Lakes technical divers do a lot of cave diving training because it's the most extreme diving, and that's one of the things we learned. So in the early days of videoing wrecks, me and my buddy would want to get down there first if we were with a bunch of people, because we had the pig pen divers, we called them. They would fall out on the wreck and kick it, silt it all up. So we'd want to quick get down there and video before they muck things up. Yeah, it looked like dust following them around like Pigpen and the Peanuts commercial. But so that's where the frog kick comes from. And the vortex of water comes straight back or slightly up off the fins, which keeps it nice and clear. If you stir that silt up, it can stay there for hours, even days. So again, the wreck is filleted open, the masts are down, again, broken up. That is the stem post right there, the very front of the ship, still stands nearly perfectly vertical, and the ship is kind of collapsed down around it. So for this length of dive, they will decompress for about 50 minutes up to the ship. Well, now for one of my favorite parts is to figure out why this ship sank. So here is the path of the Jarvis Lord. This shoal, this is the North Manitou Shoal Lake, which sits out almost halfway in between. And the freighters now come way down and turn. Well, that isn't the way it was back in the day. Back in the day, the shipping lane used to cut in close here over the shoal. Well, of course, when they made these charts in the 1860s, 1870s, it was mostly schooners that drafted, 6 feet, 8 feet. The Jarvis Lord was drafting 18 feet. So if you had a low water year, the captain maybe got a little too close to the island, that sand moves around down there. We think, here's the shoal comes way out here. It gets pretty shallow there. We think the Jarvis Lord came through and kissed the bottom of the North Manitou Shoal right there. It wouldn't take much. You just had to barely touch it and spring a plank. And at 18 feet down, water would have been rushing in that, basically a floating brick, right? She was filled with iron ore, sitting low in the water. Water would have been shooting in like a fire hydrant. He would have known immediately he was in trouble. Now, why he didn't try to make South Manitou Harbor, I don't know. Maybe boat traffic. Maybe there was, it was packed with schooners and steamers. So he looped around and tried to make it to Pyramid Point. He got within 2 miles of the shoreline. This wreck is only 1.8 miles from the shore. It's probably the last close to shore wreck that'll be found, deep water close to wreck, shore that'll be found in the Great Lakes. So he almost made it 1.8 miles. The boiler went out and he was done. He knew that they had no more forward momentum, time to get off the ship, and they did just in a nick of time. Cal created this image of the ship going down kind of to show how it was that day. So pretty amazing. They all survived, had to spin in a November storm. They probably would have all died. So just a little bit of the fun detective work of finding these things and kind of figuring out what happened. All the work I do is self-funded. I've never accepted donations. I've never accepted a single penny because nobody's ever offered. But the money I do raise comes from my book sales, and Christmas time is coming. So I do have a couple of books for sale here tonight. The Search for the Westmoreland and Still Missing, and tonight's special, both for $25. What a deal. Well, thanks so much for coming out tonight. I hope you enjoyed exploring Northern Lake, Michigan with me. And thank you. If you have any questions, I'd love to answer them. You bet. Yeah, lights are fine. Yes.
What do you attribute the fact that nothing has been salvaged off the Westmoreland?
So there's a law called the Abandoned Shipwreck Act, which came into being in 1987, which makes it illegal to take anything from a shipwreck. So back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, into the 80s, when a new shipwreck would be discovered, it would just get stripped by divers. They would cut the wheel off. They would take, if I was giving a talk back then, I'd be showing you China from the wreck. It was trophy hunting, right?
Yeah.
Today's trophy's video. I can bring it right down on the wreck. And if I had some cold water for you to stick your hand in, it would be just like being there. So the culture has changed now. We leave all the artifacts down there. But there's a downside to that too, is they're decaying, disappearing. But what do we do? So today's historical societies and museums, they have their nice building. Then they have a warehouse filled with stuff that they don't have room to show. So I don't know how much of this old stuff on the bottom is really relevant to bring up. So that's the reason most everything is staying put right now, is people are more interested in the history and things like that. Hold on, I got one question here.
Well, I kind of was along the same thing, but that one ship that's totally intact, is that a way they could bring that whole thing up?
Yes, but to preserve it, they would have to build a giant building and spray it with ethylene glycol or polyethylene glycol. Which one isn't? Cool, I get confused with the two. There's a chemical they use to stabilize the wood, so it would take like 7-10 years. I think the Vasa over in Sweden, they did it. There's not the interest right now, but maybe in 50 years or 100 years, our grandkids or great-grandkids might say, hey, we want to capture this unique piece of Great Lakes history, and maybe they'll raise it up and preserve it. Then it should still be in good shape. Hold on, I got one back here.
What did they use for fuel? I mean, coal and wood, or?
It started off as cordwood. The Westmoreland didn't use coal, it used all wood, and it would burn a cord of wood an hour under normal circumstances. So they would stop at every stop. The Manitou Islands, they used to have big virgin forest, went right through the smokestacks of those early steamers. They had stops where they would fill them with cordwood all the time. That's where a lot of our virgin forest went to. And coal, 1870s, 1880s, they started switching to coal because they were running out of wood and it was more efficient. And
I was right here, but I don't know. And if you don't want to talk about this, it's fine. What about these crazy guys out of Frankfurt and Muskegon that are running around trying to find the Confederate gold?
I know those guys. I just had.
Oh, I met them. I met them, and they're wonderful. I saw their boat go out, and I watched them on TV, and it was really funny because I happened to be shopping in Frankfurt that day, and I saw them, and that's what the guys said. Now, but it just seems like, and I know it's for TV and stuff, but every time it gets right to the point, they never find anything. No.
So,
But I mean, yours is like, you're sitting here going, Becky and I are like going, oh my goodness, and I can hear them back there. I mean, this is wonderful. I just,
what is it, the Treasure of Oak Island?
no, not that. Well,
Well, that's,
he's hanging out with that guy because he's got the money.
yeah. So that's a good business model for a TV show is, learning about things and things like that. So it's just,
But I think the guy's sincere. I think he really is sincere.
yes.
No, I think he is.
Yes,
really
I
do
believe
think
he
he's-
believes it.
I really do think he does.
Yes.
Because he was very convincing.
Okay, there you go. So it's, it's what you make of it. Just personally, I like primary source information, facts immediately and what's there. But to each their own. But yeah, Kevin's a good guy. About once a year we get together, catch up on the latest and, yeah, nice guy, fun guy.
Well, don't tell him that I asked that.
Come after you.
Yes. Oh, we got, behind you, he was
That's
first.
Oh, well, actually, I'm going to throw two unrelated. I noticed you don't use any ROVs in your dives, and I also wondered why the freshwater seems to preserve better than, and that's probably a chemistry question, than saltwater. They say that the Titanic is going to deteriorate.
Yeah.
Yet our shipwrecks seem to be very well preserved.
Yeah, Titanic will be gone. The Westmoreland sank 60 years before the Titanic, and it's in way better shape. It's just the salt water is corrosive. It's just like a salt in the winter to our cars. And the wood teredo worms they have in the ocean. Great Lakes doesn't have teredo worms, and we have great white oak that our ships were built from. ROVs are coming. We have an ROV in our group. You'll probably see that coming up with some of the wrecks we're doing. It's just making the conversion. Plus, I like having divers, and I think we're gonna have a combo of ROV filming the divers because it gives perspective of the size of the wrecks. And I like seeing the diver to say, oh, the ship is that big.
Plus, the diver can bring up the whiskey that you say you haven't found.
Yeah. So
And the gold.
in the end of that Westmoreland video, I say there's, a hatch leading to the unexplored bilge level. And it's about the size of this right here. And it does lead down to the level we think the whiskey's in. So one of my buddies is like, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go inside the ship, take our tanks off, push them into the hole, go down into the hole, put our tanks on, and then we'll go find the whiskey. And I said, I can go down to the corner store for $20, get a bottle of whiskey that's gonna taste better than the stuff that's been sitting in an old barrel in algae water for 150 years. I'm not gonna do that. You gotta be out of your mind. Yes.
Yes. I have kind of a morbid sense of question, but do you ever find human remains? Not everybody gets off here.
Correct, yes. As a matter of fact, there's one of the I never pointed out, it looks like there's a rib cage near the stern. I just don't mention it because you do come across stuff, but we're interested in history. We know these are grave sites. We would have been sailors back in the day, so we just treat them respectfully. We know the sacrifice they made to build this country. That's how our country was built, is all the shipping going out west from these guys.
You just
So,
leave them then if you find them.
They're grave sites. We treat them with honor. We don't, and that's it. Try not to film them or point them. We know they're down there. And, but we feel it's best to honor them like this and tell their story and share it, 100, 120, 150 years later. So I think that's the best way to honor them. Yes.
Do modern freighters go down that passage?
Yes. I saw a few there this year. Occasionally have to dodge them. I had a cruise ship creep up on me when I was coming back from Beaver Island. Yeah, come up behind me. I said, what the heck? And I got this app on my phone and I was able to, what the heck? And it was this big black cruise ship. And then it turned off like between Fox Island but yeah, there's freighters still going through the passage and they move pretty fast, 16 knots, 18 knots. I mean, they're booking. Yes.
You guys ever dive through the aircraft carrier, Lake Michigan? The planes are coming down.
So the missing aircraft in Lake Michigan.
Yeah, I was at the Air Zoo a couple months ago and they were bringing one up. And they said you can't get any more out of there because of what you just said.
So
How many planes are down
There's planes now. I believe all the planes have been located by a company called A&T Recovery, Allen Terrace. They bring up the aircraft. They know where they all are. And what they do is they partner with a corporate sponsor like McDonald's. And they'll bring up a plane and they'll bring it to like the air zoo and they'll pay for a restoration of it. And they try to do maybe one a year. So sometimes it can be a little sticky. Sometimes they got to fight with the Navy. Sometimes, the archaeologists get pissed off. One of the things they're having a problem with now is the quagga mussels. So the quagga mussels produce a phosphate as waste. So they eat algae and plankton and then crap out phosphates, which deteriorate the aluminum of these aircrafts. So now these World War II aircraft are starting to deteriorate more quickly. So if we want to get them up, we're probably better start hustling on it. So it's just one of the problems we have with the quagga mussels. They're deteriorating, and the shipwrecks also are starting to deteriorate more rapidly with the increase of water temperature at depth, because photons of light are now going down 1, 2, 3, 400 feet and warming the water much deeper. So changing environment out there, but hopefully they'll bring all of them up.
Do they plan on getting rid of the mussels?
He's got a follow up, but I'll answer that.
He said there's about 136 planes down there.
Yeah.
That plane that he did, they're taking that down to Texas to the museum down there. But I asked him, I says, how many planes are down there? And he's like, 136. And he says, you get any more of those? Not anymore. I don't know how long he's got them.
Yeah, we'll see. Subject to change. There's a lot of politics behind it.
Do they plan on getting rid of those mussels?
Can't
Is there
do
a way
it.
to do it?
You could bring in an invasive species, but you know how that always turns into a nightmare? Like all of a sudden they'll eat, oh, we got these piranhas to eat the, and then they, the quaggas are invasive, yeah. They come from the Black Sea.
So, I mean, when I saw them, you just seemed like you just want to go.
Yeah, they're very sharp. They're here to stay. There's really no way to get rid of them.
Doesn't the mercury in the bottom of Lake Michigan affect them mussels?
Makes them bigger. I've seen them the size of just kidding. I don't know. Makes them, mutates them into, no, great question. I don't know. I don't think so. Maybe it's not enough to
It didn't look like.
affect them.
They seem to be.
Or maybe they like it. I don't know. They're prolific though. They cover the whole bottom, and when you get out past 60 feet past the surf zone, they carpet the bottom. Yes.
How did you, this is a personal question.
Oh,
How did you ever get connected with this field? I mean, did you just lay in bed as a kid and say, gee, this is what I want to do?
okay. This is where we get weird. So when I was real little, like 4 years old, and I can remember back this, I was always better in the water than I was on land. Like I was never a fast runner, but in the water, I could swim and I was just a natural fish. Well, I had older brothers who would build model ships, right? And we had a pool. Well, they'd be out there blowing them up with M80s and sinking them in the pool. I can remember as a kid going down and looking with my mask and looking at these sunken ships and submarines at the back. That kind of stuck in my mind for some reason. And then I got introduced to the Titanic in our elementary. So this is like second grade. Started reading books on the Titanic in our little elementary school library. And I just got very interested in shipwrecks and disasters. And later in life, I loved mysteries. And then I found out there were so many still missing in Lake Michigan. I said, how can a ship the size of like the Pure Marquette 18, 338-foot steel ship, how can that still be missing? How can they not find it? So then that led me down the next rabbit hole to figure out how to find them. And then I got hooked in with people as crazy as I am. And
I think it's wonderful. Have you been to the Titanic?
No, I've never even dove in saltwater. I just basically spend all my time in northern Lake Michigan. Yes.
The Edmund Fitzgerald lives in legend, and obviously that represents the ultimate shipwreck. Are there any, the 300-footer is no slouch, but I mean, pretty much that's the epitome of the apex of big ships.
Of Great Lakes.
There's none in Lake Michigan or Huron or any of that size, are there?
There is, so the Edmund Fitzgerald, just to scale, is 729 feet long. The Pure Marquette was the nearest biggest in Lake Michigan at 338. The next one is called it's in my neck of the woods. No, that's been found. No, it's not been found yet. And I was just looking for it, so I should know the name of it. But it's a 300-foot freighter that went down in 1892. It's two initials and a name, but I get so many ships in my head that stuff comes in and stuff falls out the back end. I can't remember. It's a giant ship out there. I don't know why I can't remember. It's Western Reserve and the Gilcher. That's it. W.C. Gilcher is off of North Manitou, and that's at 300 foot. That's the still biggest missing. No, the Carruthers in Lake Huron, I think, is 400 or 500 feet long. That's still missing in Lake Huron. Yes.
I just want to know. I don't dive, but I have snorkeled. When you're down that deep, you got the water pressure on you. You're basically all alone. You come upon a wreck like that. What's the sensation? Can you see people walking up and down the decks, and you try to imagine what it was? And
that video of the Westmoreland was the first dive, the first time anybody's seen it since 1854. And I remember I went down there with my camera. I bought on eBay for $99, and I went from the stern and went from the bow to the stern. And the pilot house isn't here, the cabins, this is collapsed. And I could kind of go through, and then I got around the lifeboat damage, and I'm like, whoa, 15 people died right here. Right here they died. They're probably right around me. And, it's an eerie feeling, but mostly I was focusing on the dive because, when you're technical diving, you have multiple gases, multiple regulators, you're filming, you got to keep track of a million things. So I didn't have a ton of time to think about it. There's a lot going on. And I describe it in the book. I almost bought the farm on that first dive, but it got pretty hairy towards the end. Yes?
Have you ever come across the cement ships? And so what do they look like?
No, I don't. We're talking the Liberty ships?
Yeah, the ones made of cement.
No, I don't know there's any in Lake Michigan. They're either steel or wood. I don't know any Liberty ships that went down. Maybe I can't think of any offhand. So I think those are mostly East Coast, and were used in World War II. They made them and pumped them out really fast, and a lot of them got sank by U-boats. But I don't know of any in Great Lakes, but they'd be very well preserved if they were in the Great Lakes. Excellent. Well, hey, thanks so much, everybody. If you're interested in the book, please come up. And any more questions, please come up. Thank you.
When I was a kid, I lived right on the
Did you find a pen yet?
I have a connection.